23 years she watched the world pass her gate. Then one rider stopped, and her heart remembered how to beat.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories. Turn on the bell icon so you can do not miss any new video.
The morning sun painted the Kansas prairie in shades of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the weathered fence posts that marked the boundary of the only world Clara Whitmore had ever known. 23 years she had walked this land, breathed this air, and watched the seasons turn from the same worn porch where her mother had rocked her as an infant. The farm was her cradle, her classroom, her prison, and her sanctuary, all wrapped into 160 acres of stubborn soil that demanded everything and gave back just enough to survive. Clara stood at the kitchen window, her hands submerged in soapy water, watching the dust rise on the distant road. Riders passed occasionally, travelers heading west toward dreams or east toward memories. But they never stopped. No one ever stopped. The Whitmore farm sat 3 miles from the nearest town, far enough to be forgotten, close enough to watch the world move on without her. Her father had died 2 winters ago, taken by a fever that swept through the county like God's cold hand. Her mother had followed 6 months later, not from illness, but from a heart that simply forgot how to beat without its partner. Clara had buried them both beneath the old oak tree behind the barn, and she had stayed because staying was all she knew how to do. The dust on the road grew thicker, and Clara's hands stilled in the water. A single rider emerged from the golden haze, moving slowly, deliberately, as if time held no authority over him. His horse was a paint mare, brown and white patches, catching the morning light like a living quilt. The rider himself sat tall and straight, his black hair falling past his shoulders, a worn hat shading features that grew clearer as he approached. He stopped at her gate. Clara's heart performed a strange flutter, a sensation so foreign she pressed her wet hand against her chest as if to calm a startled bird. Strangers did not stop at her gate. Strangers did not look toward her farmhouse with eyes that seemed to see everything, including the loneliness she wore like a second skin. She dried her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the sun. The rider had dismounted now, holding his mare's reins loosely, waiting with a patience that seemed carved from the very earth beneath his boots. He was Apache. She knew this not from any malice or fear, but from the stories her grandmother had told, from the copper tone of his skin, from the silver and turquoise that gleamed at his throat. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, dusty and practical, but there was something ancient in the way he held himself, something that whispered of mountains and rivers and skies that stretched forever. Clara walked toward the gate, her feet moving before her mind could counsel caution. He watched her approach, his dark eyes revealing nothing and everything at once. Up close, she could see the lines of travel on his face, the weathered hands that spoke of hard work, the quiet strength that radiated from him like heat from summer stones. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was deep and gentle, like a creek running over smooth rocks. "My horse needs water, and I wondered if you might spare some." Clara looked at the mare, at the dust coating her flanks, at the tired dip of her beautiful head. Something in her chest opened, a door she hadn't known was closed. "Of course," she said. "There's a trough by the barn. You can rest in the shade while she drinks." She led him around the house, acutely aware of his presence behind her, of the soft rhythm of his footsteps matching hers. The paint mare followed willingly, her hooves stirring up small clouds of dust that danced in the afternoon light. At the trough, the horse drank deeply, while the man removed his hat and wiped his brow with a faded bandana. His hair fell forward, catching the light, and Clara noticed gray threads woven through the black, signs of a life fully lived. "I'm Clara Whitmore," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. She so rarely spoke to anyone that her voice sounded strange to her own ears, rusty from disuse. He looked at her then, really looked, and she felt herself seen in a way she never had been. "Joseph Redhawk," he said. "I've been called many names, but that's the one I chose for myself. "Where are you traveling from, Mr. Redhawk?" A smile ghosted across his face, there and gone like wind through tall grass. "Everywhere and nowhere, Miss Whitmore. I've been working ranches from here to the territory. Following the work, following the seasons." "That sounds," Clara paused, searching for the word, "free." Sometimes freedom is just another word for having nowhere to belong. The word struck her like a bell, resonating in the hollow places of her heart. She understood belonging too well, the weight of it, the way it could anchor you to a single piece of earth until you forgot the world was vast and waiting. "Would you like to stay for supper?" The invitation escaped her lips before thought could intervene. That is, I have stew and bread from this morning, and it's nearly evening, and—" "I would like that very much," Joseph said, and his smile reached his eyes this time, transforming his weathered face into something almost beautiful. That evening, as the sky turned from blue to orange to deep purple, they sat on her porch and shared a meal of simple food that tasted better than anything Clara had eaten in years. The presence of another person, the sound of a voice other than her own, filled the farmhouse with something she had almost forgotten existed. Life. Real, breathing, unexpected life. Joseph told her stories of the places he had seen, of red rock canyons and forests so green they hurt to look at, of rivers that carved through stone and mountains that touched the clouds. He spoke of working alongside men of every color and creed, of long cattle drives and quiet nights beneath stars that seemed close enough to touch. Clara listened with her whole being, drinking in his words like her parched soul was the trough, and his voice was cool, clear water. She asked questions, dozens of them, hungry questions that revealed how starved she was for the world beyond her fence line. "Haven't you ever wanted to leave?" Joseph asked, and the question hung in the air between them, delicate and dangerous. "Every day," Clara whispered, and saying it aloud made it real in a way it never had been before. "But wanting and doing are different creatures, Mr. Redhawk. This farm is all I have, all I've ever had." "Is it what you want, though, or is it just what you know?" No one had ever asked her that. No one had ever looked at her and seen a woman with wants, rather than just duties. Tears pricked at her eyes, unexpected and embarrassing, and she turned her face toward the darkening fields. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted. "I used to dream of seeing the ocean. My mother had a painting of it, waves all blue and green, crashing against rocks. I'd stare at it for hours, imagining the salt on my lips, the sound of water that went on forever." Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Then softly he said, "I've seen the ocean. It's everything you imagine and more. The water goes so far that it becomes the sky, and you can't tell where one ends and the other begins." Something in Ciel. Ara broke open then, not painfully but like a flower finding the sun after a long winter. She wept quietly, for the mother she had lost, for the father who had worked himself into an early grave, for the girl she had been who had pressed her nose against a painting and dreamed of impossible things. Joseph did not try to comfort her with words. Instead, he sat in steady silence beside her, his presence an anchor in the storm of her grief. When her tears finally slowed, he simply handed her his bandana and looked out at the stars as if nothing unusual had occurred. He stayed that night in the barn despite Clara's offer of the spare bedroom. It wouldn't be proper, he said, though his eyes lingered on her face in a way that made propriety feel like a small and foolish thing. In the morning, Clara woke before dawn and found him already working, mending the broken fence rail she had been unable to fix on her own, hauling water, feeding the chickens. He moved through chores as if he had always been there, as if the farm had been waiting for his hands. One day became two became a week. Joseph never asked to stay, and Clara never asked him to leave. They fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing, working side by side in the daylight hours, sharing quiet conversations as the sun set. He told her about his childhood in the territory, about the grandmother who had taught him the old stories, about the day he had left his people to find his own path. She told him about her parents, about the books she had read until their spines cracked, about the dreams she had packed away like winter clothes. It was on the 10th night that everything changed. They were sitting on the porch as always when Joseph turned to her with an expression she couldn't read. "Clara," he said, and the sound of her name in his voice made her heart skip. "I've been a wanderer all my life, never wanted to stay anywhere, never wanted to belong to anyone or anything. But sitting here with you, watching the stars come out over your fields, I felt something I thought I'd lost a long time ago." "What?" Clara asked, barely breathing. "Home," he said simply. "You feel like home to me." She didn't know who moved first. Perhaps they moved together, drawn by a gravity that had been building since the moment he stopped at her gate. His lips touched hers, tentative at first, then deep and sure, and Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet, rearranging itself around this new and terrifying truth. She loved him. She loved this Apache cowboy who had wandered into her life like an answered prayer she hadn't known how to speak. She loved his quiet strength, his patient hands, his eyes that held the memory of 1,000 miles. She loved the way he made her feel seen, known, worthy of something more than survival. "Stay," she whispered against his mouth. "Please stay." "For how long? Forever? Or until forever ends? Whichever comes first." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching her face for doubt, for hesitation. "I'm not an easy man to love, Clara. The world isn't kind to people who look like me. There would be talk, there would be—" "Let them talk," she said, and her voice was stronger than it had ever been. "Let the whole territory talk until their tongues fall out. I've spent my entire life caring what people think, staying inside lines someone else drew. I'm done with that now." Joseph cupped her face in his work-roughened hands, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "My grandmother used to say that the spirits bring people together for a reason, that some souls are meant to find each other across any distance, any difference, any divide. I never believed her until now." That night, Clara Whitmore made a decision that would change the course of her life. She would sell the farm, take what money it brought, and go with Joseph to see the places he had described. The red canyons, the green forests, the ocean that stretched into forever. She would finally become the woman she had always dreamed of being, the woman who had been trapped inside her like a butterfly in a jar. The day they left, Clara stood at the gate and looked back at the farmhouse one last time. Her parents' graves beneath the oak tree seemed to glow in the morning light, and she whispered a goodbye that was also a promise. She would carry them with her, their love and their sacrifices, but she would not let their memory become a chain that bound her to a life half-lived. Joseph helped her onto his paint mare and climbed up behind her, his arms circling her waist, his heart beating against her back. As they rode away from the only home she had ever known, Clara felt something she had only read about in books. Joy. Pure, unbridled, terrifying joy. The road stretched before them, dusty and uncertain, leading to a future neither of them could predict. There would be hardship ahead, she knew. There would be people who frowned at them, towns that turned them away, nights when they would have nothing but each other and the stars overhead. But there would also be mornings of waking in his arms, sunsets painted across unfamiliar skies, and the sound of the ocean filling her ears for the very first time. Clara Whitmore had never left the farm. But Clara Redhawk, as she had decided to call herself, was going to see the whole wide world, one beautiful, breathtaking mile at a time. And as they crested the hill and her farmhouse disappeared from view, she didn't look back again. There was no need. Everything she needed was right there, holding her close, riding toward tomorrow.